Thanks for joining us today. War. It's one of the most troubling themes in the Old Testament. Commands to destroy nations, battles fought in God's name, and stories that can seem at odds with the God of love we read about in the New Testament. How should we make sense of it? Was God endorsing violence for his people, or is there more going on beneath the surface? In this video, we'll explore the historical, cultural, and theological context of war in the Old Testament, and uncover how these accounts fit into God's larger plan of justice, mercy, and redemption. Before we continue, please remember to subscribe, like, and share. What was the ideal plan of God when Israel is confronted with enemies? Repeatedly, clear statements were made by God concerning his plan when Israel was challenged with enemies. In Exodus 14, fearing the Egyptians marching after them, the Israelites reproved Saul, their leader. But Moses answered the people, "Do not be afraid. Stand firm and you will see the deliverance the Lord will bring you today. The Lord will fight for you. You need only to be still." Verse 13 and 14. The Lord made the wheels of the chariots come off so that they had difficulty driving. Verse 25. The Egyptians caught the message. "Let's get away from the Israelites. The Lord is fighting for them against Egypt." Verse 25. The Israelites also caught the message and reacted the way they always should have reacted throughout their history. When the Israelites saw the great power the Lord displayed, they put their trust in him. Verse 31. In Exodus 23, God revealed his plans for the conquest of Canaan. A long quotation will confirm the clarity of God's plan. "See, I am sending an angel ahead of you to guard you along the way and to bring you to the place I have prepared. If you listen carefully to what he says and do all that I say, I will be an enemy to your enemies and will oppose those who oppose you. My angel will go ahead of you and bring you into the land of the Amorites, Hittites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hivites, and Jebusites, and I will wipe them out. I will send my terror ahead of you and throw into confusion every nation you encounter. I will make all your enemies turn their backs and run. I will send the hornet ahead of you to drive the Hivites, Canaanites, and Hittites out of your way. Little by little I will drive them out before you." Exodus 23, verses 20, 22, 23, 27, 28, and 30. The only action God expected from the Israelites: "You must demolish them, the gods of the Amorites, etc., and break their sacred stones to pieces." Verse 24. And the Israelites gave God their decision of trust. "Everything the Lord has said we will do." Chapter 24, verse 3. In Deuteronomy 1, here we have a confirmation of God's intent in a book, beginning with a reminder of the past history of Israel. "The Lord your God, who is going before you, will fight for you, as he did for you in Egypt." Verse 30. The Lord had never commanded them to go up and fight. It was not his purpose that they should gain the land by warfare, but by strict obedience to his commands. pp. From these texts, we can conclude that from the beginning of the history of the Israelites, the following principle was established, supported by God's mighty acts. If the Israelites allowed God to take charge of the adversaries, the only action required of God's people would be to trust and obey. There are more examples of God's battle strategies, for instance, when dealing with challenges confronted by Gideon, 1211 to 1171 BC. Facing the threat of the Midianite army, Gideon gathered 32,000 men. Judges 7, verse 3. God reduced the number to 300, verse 7, with only trumpets, empty jars, and torches as weapons, verse 16. How did the battle turn out? When the 300 trumpets sounded, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. The army fled, verse 22, without any armed intervention by Gideon's soldiers. It is true that the Israelites pursued the Midianites, verse 23, and men of Ephraim killed Oreb and Zeb, verse 25. Gideon also killed Zebah and Zalmunna, taking the ornaments off their camels' necks, 8 verse 21. The truth that these were Gideon's and the people's human initiatives, and not according to God's plan, is confirmed by the tragic ending of the story. Gideon made the gold into an ephod, which he placed in Ophrah, his town. All Israel prostituted themselves by worshipping it there, and it became a snare to Gideon and his family. Verse 27. Then there is the story of Jehoshaphat, 872 to 848 BC. Facing a threatening army, the pious and trustful king declared to his people, "Do not be afraid, for the battle is not yours but God's." 2 Chronicles 20 verse 15. You will not have to fight this battle. Take up your positions, stand firm, and see the deliverance the Lord will give you. Verse 17. The king took a clear stand. Have faith in the Lord your God. Verse 20. The army consisted of only a choir. Verse 21. As they began to sing and praise, the Lord set ambushes. Verse 22. The result was, the men of Ammon and Moab rose up against the men from Mount Seir to destroy and annihilate them. After they finished slaughtering the men from Seir, they helped to destroy one another. Verse 23. Then there is the story of Hezekiah, 729 to 686 BC. The king was known among his very adversaries as one who trusted in the Lord, 2 Kings 18 verse 22 and 19 verse 10. Sennacherib attempted to destabilize the people's trust in God, 2 Kings 18 verse 29 and 30, but it was useless. The result was, that night the angel of the Lord went out and put to death 185,000 men in the Assyrian camp, 19 verse 35, without any intervention from Israel. The conclusion is that God promised that if Israel trusted in him, he would deliver them and they would not have to do anything. In reality, throughout Israel's history, when the leaders and the people trusted the Lord, he delivered them. However, God was not responsible for the other situations where Israel interferes. What happens when Israel ignores God's plan? Let's consider Israel's first battle against the Amalekites. The Amalekites came and attacked the Israelites at Rephidim. Moses said to Joshua, "Choose some of our men and go out to fight the Amalekites." Exodus 17 verse 8 and 9. Let's look at the background. 10 times in the 10 plagues the almighty hand of God had been revealed, and the people of Israel had only recently left Egypt. They had once again witnessed the almighty hand of God in the spectacular destruction of the Egyptian army in the Red Sea. One would think that they would trust the Lord forever. 3 days later, the people grumbled against Moses. Exodus 15 verse 24, instead of trusting the one who had just recently accomplished such fantastic miracles. But right away the Lord showed Moses a piece of wood. Moses threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. Verse 25. And instead of being offended, as should have been the case, God brought them to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees, and they camped there near the water. 15 verse 27. How magnificent of God! One would think that this time the Israelites would trust their kind Heavenly Father for the rest of their lives. A few days later, however, on their way to Sinai, the whole community grumbled against Moses and Aaron. "You have brought us out into this desert to starve this entire assembly to death." Exodus 16 verse 3. Again, instead of being offended, God, with his usual graciousness, immediately provided a delicious biscuit which was white like coriander seed and which tasted like wafers made with honey, called manna. 16 verse 31. And because they had grumbled about not having any more pots of meat, as in Egypt, 16 verse 3, the Lord offered them quails, which covered the camp, verse 13, for dinner. We can imagine that the Creator certainly did not enjoy doing that, but what wouldn't he consent to do to win back his dissatisfied children? We shall not spend time discussing the new abusive disregard for God's program, seen when some of the people went out on the 7th day to gather manna. 16 verse 27, despite the command of the Lord to rest, verse 30, on the Sabbath. How can we explain the circumstances of the confrontation with the Amalekites? They, the people of Israel, had not really suffered the pangs of hunger. They had food for the present, but they feared for the future. They could not see how the host of Israel was to subsist in their long travels through the wilderness upon the simple food they then had, and in their unbelief they saw their children famishing. The Lord was willing that they should be brought short in their food, and that they should meet with difficulties, that their hearts should turn to him who had hitherto helped them, that they might believe in him. He was ready to be to them a present help. If, in their want, they would call upon him, he would manifest to them tokens of his love and continual care. After this sure promise from God, it was criminal unbelief in them to anticipate that they and their children might die with hunger. So, note the three elements of the next sentence. First, if they had trusted God. Second, he would have prevented their enemies from making war with them. And third, he would have in this way manifested to his people from whence cometh their strength. Following this criminal unbelief and their cruel murmurings, the Israelites deserved to be left to themselves, but God condescended to help them in the very battle that their unbelief towards him had provoked. As long as Moses held up his hands, the Israelites were winning, but whenever he lowered his hands, the Amalekites were winning. Exodus 17, verse 11. This act of Moses, reaching up his hands towards God, was to teach Israel that while they made God their trust and laid hold upon his strength, he would fight for them and subdue their enemies. With this illumination of the text, we could paraphrase Exodus 17, verse 8 and 9 in the following way. Because of the criminal unbelief and the constant cruel murmurings of the people, God permitted the Amalekites to attack the Israelites at Rephidim. God did not order Joshua to organize the battle, but Moses, as leader of the Israelites, had to take in hand the situation in which they had put themselves. Joshua was designated as the head of the army. With the miraculous intervention of God, he was able to overcome the Amalekite army with the sword. Exodus 17, verse 13. This way of obtaining a victory was totally opposed to God's plan, since he had promised to do the fighting himself for the deliverance of his people. In fact, we can imagine the sorrow of this same Joshua when he had to confess in his own writing at the end of his career, "The citizens of Jericho fought against you, as did also the Amorites, Perizzites, Canaanites, Hittites, Girgashites, Hivites, and Jebusites. But I, God, gave them into your hands. You did not do it with your own sword." Joshua 23, verse 11 and 12. Let's look at a specific example of a war God ordered in Judges 1 verse 1 and 2, which states, "After the death of Joshua, the Israelites asked the Lord, 'Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?' God ordered Judah to be the first to attack the Canaanites. How can we explain this order of God to make war? Let us again make an effort to look at the context. In his farewell speech, Joshua 23, the old leader reminded them, "You yourselves have seen everything the Lord your God has done to all these nations for your sake. It was the Lord your God who fought for you. The nations I, God, conquered." Verse 4. "The Lord your God himself will drive them out of your way. He will push them out before you, and you will take possession of the land." Verse 5. The only contribution the people had to make was, "Obey all that is written in the book of the law." Verse 6. "Do not associate with these nations." Verse 7. "Hold fast to the Lord." And verse 8. "Love the Lord." Verse 11. Assembling all the tribes of Israel at Shechem, Joshua had the people renew the covenant. Joshua 24. The patriarch insisted on the action of God. "I, God, sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you, also the Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow." Verse 12. "But Joshua died." Judges 2, verse 8. "And there came another generation who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel." Verse 10. At least they pretended not to know the Lord, although they had been systematically informed and instructed. They did not listen to the voice, is the literal translation, or according to the NIV, they disobeyed God, 2 verse 2. But, strangely enough, they asked the Lord, "Who will be the first to go up and fight for us against the Canaanites?" 1 verse 1. What should God's reaction have been? We would expect him to say, "You act as if you do not know me, you do not even listen to my voice. You know perfectly well that I promised to take care of the conquest, and that you wouldn't have to fight at all. Joshua and your fathers reminded you of my miraculous interventions, and now you ask, who will be the first among us to fight? Are you making fun of me? You offend me, I'm going to abandon you." But amazingly that the Lord answered. 1 verse 2. Before we continue, let us stop here a moment and reflect on this first verb. Even when his people broke the relationship, God maintained it as long as he could, consenting to answer a partner who had not even listened to him in the past. This was the first surprise. The second surprise was God conformed to the project of the Israelites, and although it completely opposed his project, he ordered a war. We may react to this in several ways. We might say, you see, God did take the initiative to order wars. Or we might say, God was not consistent. One time he said he would do the fighting, and another time he said Judah should do it. Or we might say, shouldn't we try to understand God? God goes as far as possible to reach his children where they were. Even if you do not listen, he seems to say, and you ask for the exact opposite of my plan, I shall answer and accompany you in your undertaking. Judah is to go. What's more, we read, when Judah attacked, the Lord gave the Canaanites and Perizzites into their hands. Judges 1 verse 4. If you were afraid of being misunderstood, you certainly wouldn't have done that, would you? But God did it. This is the God of the Old Testament. What condescension on God's part to our level of thinking. Let's illustrate this point with a modern story, realizing the limitations of the illustration. A man's wife was studying voice at the Music Conservatory in Basel, Switzerland. Realizing the perversity of the opera, with its gorgeous music, beautiful voices and grand orchestras which present immorality, crimes and lies, she opted for oratorios and lieder or songs. Her teacher, being an opera prima donna, suggested that the best way to observe the application of her technique would be for the students to attend the concerts where she was performing. With a little embarrassment, she told her father she would attend the concerts exclusively for professional reasons. Her highly moral preacher father was perplexed, but he felt that if he would forbid his 18-year-old daughter, who was in a critical stage of personality development, to attend the opera, it might break the fine relationship of loving trust they had developed through the years, and besides, she would go anyway. So he not only let her go, but also gave her the money for the tickets. One evening, after attending a couple of concerts, as she was listening to and watching another glorious opera performance filled with adultery, her eyes turned to the ceiling from which a huge candelabra was hanging. Suddenly the thought flashed into her mind, what if the chain holding the candelabra would break, and the candelabra would fall and kill me? Would people and the Lord have to say she died willfully contemplating adultery in the opera house? At intermission time, pretending she was not feeling well, she rushed home. Approaching the house, she was surprised to see light in her father's study, because he was usually absent every night of the week, either holding evangelistic meetings or giving Bible studies. But that night he was at home. As she entered the house, her father met her and asked if the performance was already finished. She answered no and explained her abrupt decision to leave the opera house, never to return again. "We are glad you came to this decision all by yourself," her father said. "Each time you went to the opera, I cancelled the scheduled Bible study, and your mother and I prayed for you." Could we suggest that God acted the same way toward his children? When they insisted on going their own way in life in general, or in wars in particular, he let them go, sometimes even adding his blessing, unexpected from a pure and holy God, or wise pedagogy in the face of stubbornness and pride. And so often he did win them back by maintaining his love relationship with them and allowing the free choice of his people. Coming back to our Israelites, we find that unfortunately they overdid it. Having caught Adoni-Bezek, they cut off his thumbs and big toes, Judges 1 verse 6. This, of course, was not according to God's plan. What a disgraceful testimony of the so-called people of God. Incidentally, the book of Judges should not be considered as the ideal book of God's philosophy. The last sentence in the book, a sober definition of this period in Israel's history, declares, "In those days everyone did as he saw fit." 21 verse 25. An atheistic anarchy, but at the very center of the book, could it be the central message? We read the following statement. "And the Lord was sorrowful because of Israel's misery," a translation of Judges 10 verse 16. What a God. In conclusion, the ideal plan of God: the Lord will fight for you. Just trust and obey, and he will deliver you. The fulfillment in history is seen. When the leaders and the people trusted God, he delivered them. When God's plan was not respected, God, as far as possible, accompanied his wayward children in the hope of winning them back, even when they made a decision that was the opposite of his will. What does this teach us about the character of God? In considering the attitude of God in these intricate problems of war, our admiration of him should increase immensely. In coming down to the level of his people, he has left us an example of a master teacher which is fathomless. And thus he extends his love to its extremity in order to reach his erring people as low as they are and bring them back to his caring guidance. Yes, what a risk, and so easily misunderstood, and how often he has been misunderstood. Instead of being shocked, let us bow in wonder before this most gracious and flexible God. This is the God of the Old Testament. How fortunate that he is also your God and mine, accompanying us on our wayward spiritual journey. What a God! Thanks for joining us. Don't forget to subscribe, like and share for more biblical insights.